Morning everyone. So this recording will focus on focus groups, and these are quite a useful technique for use in qualitative research, but can be a little bit more complex to organise and set up compared to one-to-one interviews. So as you can see there from the definition from the Saunders book, it's basically a group interview where you have a small number of participators. You as the researcher would be the moderator in this case, and the idea is that you try to get people to talk around quite a clearly defined topic area, and you're particularly interested in the interaction between the participants. And therefore, what's quite important about a focus group is that the group is the unit of analysis. So when you're using a focus group in your dissertation, you need to justify where you're interested in this group as interaction, as opposed to individual data from individuals. So that's very critical. It can be very, very interesting for certain areas to actually use the group as the unit of analysis and actually understand these kind of group interactions, but not for every topic. For some topics it's not very suitable at all. So that is quite a critical thing to think about. So for example, I said, an example would be understanding shared norms of behaviour at events. So for instance, it could be used quite nicely in terms of understanding the festival experience when you're interested in the way, the groups might interact there. So what's useful about focus groups is group interaction is a feature. So rather than you interviewing someone one-to-one, and it's just you interacting with other individuals, you actually are able to observe other people having conversations between themselves. It actually is derived from psychology, and particularly some of the work that was quite experimental laboratory based, where they were looking at sort of group dynamics and work in psychotherapy. And what it involves? Well, it involves you basically as a moderator asking questions to a group, but also within that group you can actually ask individuals questions. So for example, if someone talks about something in a focus group, you can ask them questions about their answers. So it doesn't just have to be a question to the whole group, it can be questions to individuals within that group. So basically you're facilitating discussion. And you can also get your participants in the focus group to take part in tasks. So for instance, you could give them some materials and they need to sort them into, maybe things they like, they don't like, or into what they think is an order of importance. So there's all sorts of different things you can do which are quite task-based in focus groups rather than just asking questions. When you're putting together groups, there are a number of different kinds of groups you can have. So you have what we'd call natural groups. So these exist in everyday life. So they might be typically friendship groups. So you could get together a group who, already interact, together in a natural way. And there's also another form is real groups, where there is some kind of history of ongoing interaction. So it might be that they've been brought together for some other purpose, and you can use them for research in a focus group. And then you have artificial groups, where actually you just bring together a group of people who they don't know each other, they've no previous history of interaction, but they're brought together because they meet particular criteria. And then below there you can see that sometimes we have what we call homogeneous groups, and these are ones where the participants have got very similar characteristics, or heterogeneous, where actually the members of the focus group are actually quite different. So a homogeneous group might be a group of young people of a similar age group who've all experienced participation in athletics. Okay, that would be a homogeneous group. A heterogeneous group might be a group of people from completely different age ranges who take part in 6 different kinds of sports. Okay. You can also do focus groups online. I have no experience of this myself, but there's 2 forms. One is what we call the synchronous focus group, where actually you organise the focus group, either in chat rooms, so it's sort of done by messages, or in a system like Zoom. Where you actually get people together. And actually I think Zoom's got a lot of potential for online focus groups. Or you can do something asynchronous, so not in real time. So if you've got participants from different parts of the world who you want to take part, you can actually do something in some kind of chat system where people can, talk and respond to different messages over a period of time, and that enables people to take part from different places and different parts of the world. And then you've got some of the key features of focus groups. So generally we have anywhere between about 7 and 12 participants. I've sometimes had students do slightly smaller groups than this, where they've had some dropouts, and that's generally okay, although it comes a certain point where too fewer participants and you just don't really get enough information or interaction going on. But there's different kind of norms. So in the UK it's usually about 7 to 9 people, in America 10 to 12, but the textbooks will show sort of slight variations on these numbers. We typically recruit our participants according to some kind of criteria, so it could be age-related, gender, life stage, all of these kinds of things, and often some kind of key experience that we're interested in researching. Groups tend to last 1.5 hours, so they are more time-consuming than a one-to-one interview, but on the other hand, you actually reach a larger number of participants in one go. Your role as a researcher would be moderator, and you need to create an environment where people feel safe enough to talk to one another about your topic, so that they're willing to actually share information about themselves, their attitudes, thoughts and feelings. So this is what you do as a moderator. And it says you should be trained to, and of course, if you were doing this as a researcher in a research organisation, people would have extra training to do focus groups. So something to bear in mind as a student is you might just be doing them for the first time with no training beyond your own reading around the topic. So they are quite high risk. So your role is to guide the discussion through a series of topic areas that you're interested in. You need to try to be able to recognise when people are talking about things of importance and actually try to get the group to explore and expand on those. And this is where it's quite difficult because groups can go off track. They suddenly start talking about something else, and this is where you come to things like group dynamics. So trying to bring the group back to the topic when they've drifted off onto something else. And also you will find you get 1 or 2 people who will dominate groups and will do a lot of the talking and other people will remain quiet. And one of the techniques I've used there is to actually give people some individual tasks, because that enables you to bring everybody into the discussion. We also try to internalise the research objectives. So as we're kind of getting material from people, we can begin to see that relates to certain things we're interested in. And then the idea is that you try to play back your understanding. You try to sort of say things back to the group. So my understanding of what you said here is, which is, the thing that you think is relevant to your research objectives. And that way they can kind of go, well, no, it's not quite that, or it is. Yes, that's what we meant. You can use different forms of questioning. Sorry, that's my coffee machine going on in the background. It will stop in a moment. You can give them material to look at, images. There's all sorts of things you can do that sort of help generate thoughts. I know that Lego do focus groups with children where they get them to play with new Lego sets, for instance. I'm not suggesting you want to take Lego, but you might want to take something else for people to look at and do that helps them think and talk about things. Many advantages. So, the main one is this thing that actually people are building on different people's views. So you get this kind of collective viewpoint. Quite time efficient, because although you might spend an hour and a half doing a focus group, you might, in that focus group, have 8 people. You can also do it as live research. So sometimes people have video recorded interactions, is one way of doing this. So you actually sort of see it as it's happening. So you get this kind of what they talk a window into the cultural and social experiences of the group. I had a student a couple of years ago who did some quite interesting research with tweenagers. So tweenagers are this age group that's usually between about 10 and 14, who are in between being children and teenagers. And she had to get special permissions to actually use that age group, but she got them to talk about their social media usage, which was quite revealing. And something, of course, as an older person, she didn't know what was happening with that age group. Lots of different stimuli you can do. I've mentioned photographs, packaging, tourism brochures, all sorts of things you can use. And what participants sometimes find is there is this safety in numbers. So as I said there, it can be less intimidating. Going to a focus group can be quite fun for people. And it means that when you might ask someone one-to-one a question in an interview where they might struggle to come up with answers, it actually gives people time to reflect on something that other people have said. So you sometimes get quite rich data because people are able to kind of go, yeah, I agree with that point and I would add to that, and you get a lot more detail there. And, you can get, a lot of energy in a focus group and some very good data. The disadvantages, though, you get people with different levels of knowledge, understandings, and some people dominate, and some people go quiet because maybe they don't share that point of view and they're not willing to tackle a particularly dominant viewpoint. So that can be a bit of a challenge. You have much less control, and what can happen is it results in dead time when the group goes off and talks about something else, and it's quite difficult to then get people back to the topic. There's all these issues about social norms and conformity, so people struggle to challenge things. You definitely don't find out anything kind of detailed about individuals in terms of their behaviour and attitudes. And I definitely wouldn't use it where your subject matter is quite intimate. So anything that people might be embarrassed to talk about, would not be suitable for a focus group. Certain respondents are quite difficult to recruit, and the problem is not just recruiting participants, but getting them together in the same place at the same time. That can be a real challenge. And other areas which are a problem, a bit like the embarrassing subject matter, when you want to talk to people about some quite difficult political or social issues, it also can be quite a problem. So there are all sorts of issues to do with things like people's fashion and tastes and personal preferences, which can make focus groups sometimes awkward for certain topics. So if you were thinking of focus groups, it would certainly be something to talk through with the supervisors to, whether it might be problematic. So we have to think about some of the practicalities, like who would you include? So this is a sampling decision. We'll cover sampling elsewhere. And, whether you want particular market segments. So focus groups are particularly used a lot in marketing research. And then how would you recruit them? And this can be a challenge. Sometimes people recruit people from a questionnaire. Sometimes people, even if you're doing marketing research, they often go out onto the street, they book a room, go out onto the street and offer to pay people quite substantial sums of money. So for instance, £50 to take part in a focus group. But you would probably do it as students through some kind of personal contact with people and maybe some kind of snowballing of finding extra participants. We also sometimes think about incentives. So in focus groups that I've conducted, they've usually been part of a research project where we've been able to provide incentives in the form of usually shopping vouchers. So effectively people, in a way, kind of get indirectly paid for taking part. But obviously as a student you wouldn't have the financial resources to do that unless your dissertation is linked to an external organisation and they might be able to fund it. We then think about where you want to do the focus group. It needs to be a suitable venue, so we don't know what the challenges are going to be in the coming months, but if you're able to do something on campus, you can book seminar rooms and they make useful venues, but otherwise you have to think about where it would take place. And it needs to be somewhere that's reasonably comfortable. So, it needs to be warm. You need to set up things around a table so people can sit and talk to one another in that kind of space. In terms of putting together a discussion guide, it's not dissimilar to an interview schedule, but tends to be a little bit longer with more kind of directions for people. And in one of the online sessions I do with you, I'm very happy to look through an example of a focus group. I've got an excellent one from one of my PhD students. And the guide needs to go from sort of fairly general at the start to more specific, and you usually go through 3 or 4 sections covering different topic areas. And as I say, typically they last up to 1.5 hours, and you need to keep a close eye on the time so you don't start overrunning. And generally you want to cover some a priori issues, so these are things that have come up from the literature we know about and we're expecting to be there, and then you want to kind of prompt and explore more emergent areas. Try to make it interesting for your participants. So we often use things like projective techniques when you get people to imagine particular scenarios and images or promotional material. And then in terms of being successful, think about what you wear. So again, like I've said, if you've looked at my interview video, you need to think about wearing similar clothes to the people who are taking part. Be prompt, be well prepared, and have everything set up for when people are arriving. And then you need to be enthusiastic. You need to introduce yourself and the project that you're doing. And you need to get the respondents to introduce themselves. And there's a number of reasons for this. One is they might not know each other. And the other thing is you want to try to get them to introduce themselves when you've got a recorder running so that you can link the person to their name. Because that's quite helpful when you're doing transcribing the focus groups to know who was saying what. I get people to write down their names on a piece of cardboard which you can fold over and actually put in front of them, and then you can use their names when you're asking questions and talking to them, and other people can use those names. So you do need to be quite confident. You've got to remain in control. And you need to use your body language, to try to mirror behaviour. Lean towards people, move back when you don't want them to talk, encourage people with eye contact, smiling, etc. So, there's quite a bit to think about being a moderator beyond actually just the questions or the activities that people are going to take in part in. But they can be really fun, but they can also be quite hard to lead. So for those of you who are interested, I will run through a focus group that was very successful and show you, the focus group protocol and how this was undertaken. So yeah, to conclude, they can be really good and useful thing to do, both for academic research and, as I say, they're used a lot in market research. They can be very good for understanding particularly aspects of consumer behaviour. They can be quite fun, can be quite revealing, but there are issues with them. Validity is always a problem, because you don't, the focus group itself is biased by the views of particular participants. You're only going to have a small number of participants in any case. There are issues trying to deal with the practicalities, and you need to be quite transparent in the analysis in terms of how a particular track might have been taken by the participants that might have led to findings which may not be particularly valid. So there are some challenges there.